In the shadow of Hollywood's most glittering dreams lies a story that refuses to stay buried. When Michael Jackson died on June 25, 2009, the world lost an entertainer who had fundamentally changed the landscape of pop music. Yet his death opened far more questions than it answered. Nearly 2 decades have passed since that fateful day. And now, as we revisit the sealed records, hidden testimonies, and revelations that emerge from investigations into his life, we discover that the truth behind the King of Pop was far more complicated than any headline ever captured. This is the story of a man whose artistry transcended borders, yet whose personal life became the subject of relentless scrutiny. It is a narrative of ambition colliding with tragedy, of allegations and denials, of legal battles and financial empires built on a foundation of controversy. To understand what truly happened, we must go back, not just to 2009, but to the beginning of the accusations that would define his legacy. On that June morning in 2009, paramedics responded to an emergency call at a rented mansion in the Holmby Hills neighborhood of Los Angeles. Michael Jackson, 50 years old, was found unresponsive in his bedroom. The man who had electrified stadiums across the globe, who had moonwalked into the hearts of millions, now lay still. Despite immediate efforts at resuscitation that lasted over an hour, he was pronounced dead at 2:26 p.m. The initial shock was overwhelming. Fans gathered outside hospitals and in streets around the world, unable to comprehend that an icon of such magnitude could simply cease to exist. But within days, the narrative shifted. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office released findings that transformed Jackson's death from a tragedy into a criminal investigation. The medical examination revealed something startling. Jackson's body contained dangerous levels of propofol, a powerful anesthetic typically reserved for surgical settings in hospitals. Combined with multiple sedatives including lorazepam and midazolam, this cocktail of medications had proved fatal. Someone had been administering these drugs to the singer in his home. The investigation quickly identified the responsible party, Conrad Murray, a cardiologist Jackson had hired to manage his sleep issues during preparation for his This Is It concert series at London's O2 Arena. Murray had been giving Jackson propofol intravenously, not in a hospital, not with proper monitoring equipment, not with the safety protocols that the drug demands. This was not an accident. This was negligence of a criminal magnitude. In 2011, Los Angeles Superior Court became the stage for one of the most watched medical malpractice trials in American legal history. The prosecution painted a clear picture: a desperate entertainer addicted to pharmaceutical solutions for his insomnia, and a physician who, blinded by the substantial salary he received, abandoned medical ethics and basic safety procedures. Murray was convicted of involuntary manslaughter in November 2011 and sentenced to 4 years in prison, though he ultimately served approximately 2 years. The conviction provided a legal conclusion, but it answered only one question: how did Jackson die? The more pressing question remained unanswered: who was Michael Jackson, really? To understand the complexity surrounding Jackson's legacy, we must examine Neverland Ranch, a property that became less a home and more a symbol of the contradictions inherent in his existence. Jackson purchased the sprawling 2,700-acre estate in Santa Barbara County in 1988 for approximately $17 million, then spent tens of millions more transforming it into a fantasy realm that blurred the boundaries between childhood wonderland and private fortress. The property featured amusement park attractions that would rival small theme parks: a Ferris wheel, roller coaster, carousel, and miniature train. A private zoo housed elephants and exotic birds. Landscaped gardens created the impression of walking through an idealized storybook world. Yet beyond the gates lay security measures that kept the outside world at a distance. Jackson explained his creation as a response to his stolen childhood. He had entered the entertainment industry as a young boy with his brothers in the Jackson Five, sacrificing the simple joys that define a normal youth. Neverland was his attempt to reclaim what had been taken from him, though critics argued that by designing it as a space where children visited and stayed as guests, he created an environment that would later become central to legal investigations. The first major crisis arrived in August 1993. An allegation emerged from a family in Los Angeles, a father and son claiming that Jackson had engaged in inappropriate conduct. Law enforcement launched a formal investigation. Search warrants were executed. Neverland Ranch was searched by authorities who documented rooms, collected photographic evidence, and interviewed staff members. Despite the intensity of the investigation, no criminal charges materialized. The Los Angeles County District Attorney determined that insufficient evidence existed to proceed with prosecution beyond a reasonable doubt. However, rather than end there, the matter transitioned into civil court, where the burden of proof is lower. The case ultimately concluded in 1994 with a confidential settlement reportedly valued between $15 million and $20 million. The settlement itself was structured carefully. Jackson did not admit wrongdoing, yet he paid a substantial sum. The exact terms were sealed, protected by confidentiality agreements that kept the public from knowing precisely what had transpired. Jackson maintained his denial of all allegations. Yet the damage to his public image proved irreversible. In December 1993, Jackson gave what would become one of the most-watched interviews in broadcast history, sitting with talk show host Oprah Winfrey before an audience of tens of millions globally. He addressed the allegations directly, denying wrongdoing while discussing his struggles with isolation, media pressure, and the burden of extraordinary fame. He spoke vulnerably about his childhood, his emotional fragility, and his desire to create spaces of innocence in a world that had stripped his own innocence away. The interview was a masterclass in crisis management and emotional transparency, yet it also marked a turning point. After this moment, Jackson's public appearances became more controlled, his interactions with the press increasingly filtered. The entertainment industry, once nearly unanimous in its adulation, began to approach him with caution. Endorsements were managed more carefully. His visibility diminished, replaced by speculation and whispered doubts. A full decade after the 1993 settlement, Jackson attempted to rebuild his narrative. He had released new music, undertaken international tours, and sought to restore his public standing. Then, in 2003, British journalist Martin Bashir released a documentary titled Living with Michael Jackson. The film showed Jackson in candid moments with a young boy named Gavin Arvizo, a cancer survivor who had befriended the singer through charitable connections. The footage depicted Jackson holding the child's hand, speaking openly about his relationships with children, and describing his philosophy of creating spaces where children could experience joy and freedom from the pressures of the adult world. The documentary triggered immediate controversy. Within months, Gavin Arvizo and his family made allegations that the boy had been abused during his stays at Neverland Ranch. They further claimed that after the documentary aired, the family had been held at the ranch against their will, subjected to intimidation, and pressured to participate in a rebuttal video defending Jackson against the negative publicity the Bashir film had generated. By November 2003, Jackson faced formal criminal charges in Santa Barbara County. The prosecution, led by Thomas Snedon, constructed a narrative of gradual seduction and control. The alleged victim had initially been welcomed as a guest, the prosecution argued. But after media attention intensified, Jackson and his associates systematically isolated the family, held them captive through psychological and physical coercion, and pressured them to lie on camera. The trial proceedings, which took place in 2005 in Santa Maria, California, revealed competing narratives about the nature of Jackson's relationships with children who visited Neverland Ranch. The prosecution presented testimony from Gavin Arvizo and his mother, Janet Arvizo, describing feelings of confinement, restrictions on movement, and inappropriate interactions. They argued that audio and video evidence from a rebuttal video the family had participated in demonstrated coercion rather than voluntary support. The defense, led by attorney Thomas Mesereau, pursued an aggressive strategy, discredit the accusers by exposing inconsistencies and unveiling their history. Mesereau introduced evidence that Janet Arvizo had previously filed a lawsuit against the J.C. Penney department store chain following a security incident, resulting in a settlement exceeding $100,000. He cross-examined her vigorously, highlighting contradictions between her testimony in this trial and her statements in previous legal proceedings. The defense also called Neverland employees who testified that the Arvizo family had freedom of movement and had left the property multiple times during the period they claimed to be confined. Travel records and photographs supported this testimony. Mesereau argued in closing statements that if the family were truly imprisoned, they had the keys to the gate. Additionally, the defense challenged the timeline. They pointed out logical inconsistencies. Victims of abuse would be unlikely to enthusiastically praise their alleged abuser on camera without evidence of direct threats. The prosecution, they argued, had failed to prove coercion beyond the testimony of the accusers themselves. On June 13, 2005, Jackson was acquitted on all counts. The jury had been unconvinced by the prosecution's case. Yet this legal victory did not restore Jackson's public image. The trial had been exhaustingly detailed, globally televised, and psychologically devastating. Jackson had spent millions on legal defense. Major projects were cancelled or delayed. His ability to generate income declined dramatically, as touring opportunities diminished and recording activity slowed. One of the most significant witnesses in Jackson's defense was actor Macaulay Culkin, who had become one of Hollywood's biggest child stars following the success of Home Alone. Culkin and Jackson had developed a friendship in the early 1990s, bound by their shared experience of childhood fame and the peculiar isolation that accompanied it. During the 2005 trial, Culkin testified under oath that Jackson had never behaved inappropriately toward him. When asked directly whether Jackson had ever molested him, Culkin responded unequivocally, "Absolutely not." His statements were consistent across multiple interviews and appearances. In a 2005 Larry King Live interview conducted during the trial, Culkin stated plainly, "He never did anything to me. I never saw him do anything." Years later, in 2018, during an appearance on Marc Maron's podcast, Culkin revisited the subject with additional context. He said, "Look, he never did anything to me. I never saw him do anything. And especially at this flashpoint in time, I'd have no reason to hold anything back." Importantly, Culkin drew a careful distinction. "I'm not going to speak for anyone else. But he never did anything to me." This carefully worded statement became significant in media analysis precisely because it avoided overreach. Culkin did not attempt to invalidate others' allegations. Instead, he confined his testimony